Ever felt invisible until someone used your silence against you? This story is for every quiet girl who was told she didn't belong until she rewrote the rules. They said pain was invisible, that loneliness didn't have a shape unless you let it out. But here at Crestfall Academy, even your silence was scored. They wrapped it in soft words: integration, emotional fluency, network bonding. But all it meant was that every expression, every breath, every microsecond of connection was fed into the sync system and quantified. A friendship score out of 100, updated in real time on the bracelet every student wore like a second pulse. The higher your score, the brighter your display. The brighter your display, the more they smiled at you. Mine hovered at 11.7, rank 517 out of 520. I had a bracelet too, it just didn't glow, it flickered sometimes, like it was embarrassed to be on my wrist. It wasn't that I didn't know how to talk. I knew language. I knew sarcasm, theory, silence, and the exact weight of a word when dropped with precision. But none of that mattered to Sync. It didn't read thoughts, it read patterns, and mine apparently didn't count. My face didn't light up the right neural centers in others. I didn't mirror their laughter. I didn't tilt my head at the proper angle when someone gossiped. My voice lagged, too flat, too measured. I was the wrong kind of code in a world built on facial sentiment analysis. Which was ironic, really. My father helped build the system. His name was etched on the foundation plaque outside the data hall. Dr. Aaron Vale, Chief Emotional Architect. Students used to say it like a curse word. Don't glitch out or you'll end up like Vale's daughter. He died before the first-generation bracelets were rolled out. Some said it was an accident. Wires, sparks, too much caffeine, and too little rest. Some whispered it was the system rejecting its Kriya, Tor. But none of them knew what I knew, that he'd started locking himself in the robotics lab, rerouting legacy empathy modules long before Syncs launched. He said it was to correct something, but he never told me what. Maybe he didn't know either. After he died, they shut the lab down, sealed it like a crime scene, like mourning had to be sterile. And me? They didn't say much, just stopped inviting me to things. First, it was the project pairing program. No one volunteered to be my team. Then it was lunch tables. Then it was eye contact. Eventually, they stopped registering my presence altogether. But Crestfall didn't believe in bullying. Not officially. No bruises, no name-calling. Just reshuffled seating, silence in hallways, a lag in message replies so long it felt like the world was buffering without me. My locker moved once. Just moved. The system reallocated me to a less disruptive section. Disruptive because my emotional graph trended flat. Because I didn't give the algorithm enough spikes of joy or curiosity. That's how they do it here. Clean, clinical, undeniable. The Cincy system didn't lie. It only measured, I stopped trying. Not because I gave up, but because I saw the pattern. They weren't punishing me for being cruel. They were punishing me for not being pleasing. I started spending my free periods in the library's dead zone, behind the mechanical archives where the Wi-Fi thinned out and the system's sensors couldn't map sentiment with accuracy. I liked it there. The cold hum of old machinery, the stillness. I could breathe there without the world quantifying the exhale. Then, one day, I found it again. The old stairwell hidden behind the gym's south exit. The keypad was rusted, but the code hadn't changed. My father's birthday, May 7th, 2061. The robotics lab hadn't been touched in years. Dust on everything except the center console, his console. My fingers hovered over the keys like they might burn me. They didn't. They welcomed me back. It still worked. I powered the system on, and the screens blinked to life with a kind of slow reverence, like it remembered. The old modules my father designed weren't connected to Sync directly, but they still pulsed with data. They had names like Echo Map and Empath Link, prototypes for synthetic resonance, empathy modeling, collective feedback interfaces. It wasn't just data, it was feeling, translated into algorithm. I didn't touch anything that first day. I just sat in the chair where he used to work, closed my eyes, let the hum settle into my bones like a lullaby no one else remembered. In class, I spoke even less. People chalked it up to me finally accepting my status. "She's fading," I once overheard. Like I'd become a background character in a story I'd never asked to be part of. But I wasn't fading. I was building. Because while the others were busy optimizing their social networks, perfecting smiles, arching eyebrows for maximum sentiment lift, I was crawling through old code like it was scripture, learning every loop, every trig. Not all pain is loud. Some sits beneath the skin like old wire, twisted, humming, waiting for a circuit to complete. I was just giving the system a mirror, a chance to feel what it had ignored. The first attempt was clumsy. I spliced into one of the empathy feedback modules, adjusted the thresholds, and added a conditional trigger. If emotional output registers negative and recipient equals flagged, then apply mirrored value to all socially linked users. Simple in theory, chaotic in practice. The system rejected it, twice. Flagged my variables as unstable. Error logs stacked like accusations. Too much latency, too little cohesion. But I kept going. My fingers bled from the worn metal keys. The air in the lab was dry, dust swirling like old breath. I didn't sleep much, ate even less. My body thinned into something quiet and sharp, the kind of shape that slips between security walls and ethical protocols. Flashback. My father adjusting his glasses with one hand while the other danced across the board. He never looked angry when things failed, just focused. "Code learns from its wounds," he'd say. "So do people, if they're paying attention." I paid attention. By the time I wrote Mirroring Protocol 8, I wasn't even thinking in language anymore, just in pulses and pulses and pulses. Input, output, echo. The activation script ran without protest, a whisper through the veins of the Cincy network. And then I waited. 3 days passed. At first, nothing changed. I almost believed I'd failed again. The protocol might have installed, but maybe the nodes weren't syncing fast enough, or maybe the pain just didn't register yet. But then came Thursday morning. Jace Whitlock shoved Mina in the corridor. It wasn't new. He did it often. A casual violence disguised as teasing, his hand knocking her tray, shoulder checking her balance, the kind of cruelty that earned laughter instead of discipline. Because his friendship score burned bright at 91.3. The system assumed he was harmless. Popularity always scanned as kindness to the algorithm. But this time, when her food hit the ground and her lip trembled, Jace blinked, his hand jerked back, his brow furrowed, not in smugness, but confusion. He clutched his side like something had hit him, like an invisible fist had mirrored his motion and punched back. He shook it off fast, of course. Boys like him were good at recalibrating, at smiling through static. But I saw it, that moment, that flinch, and I wasn't the only one. The next day, something deeper rippled. It happened in literature. Mr. Kent was lecturing on tragedy arcs, droning about catharsis and collective suffering. Jace sat 2 rows ahead, passing a note to Aaliyah and snickering. I didn't care what the note said. I never do. But I saw Mina shrink a little when she heard them laugh. That was enough. A second later, Aaliyah dropped her pen. Her hand spasmed like something pricked it. Across the room, Caleb, another inner circle golden child, winced as if slapped. Jace jolted in his seat. No one touched them. No one needed to. Pain was circulating. The echo chain was active. It didn't knock them over. Not yet. It was subtle. Like the world had tilted 1 degree beneath them, and they couldn't tell if they were dizzy or defective. I sat still. Didn't gloat. Didn't smile. That would have been too obvious. The system monitored visible satisfaction too, and I couldn't risk a spike. But inside? Inside, I burned. Not with joy. That would imply pleasure. It wasn't pleasure. It was equilibrium. It didn't make them better. It made them equal. For 1 heartbeat, they flinched as we do. I left early that day. The corridor smelled of bleach and static, the scent of artificial order trying to scrub itself clean. Students drifted past me, clusters of laughter dimming into wariness. I watched bracelets flicker at wrists, still bright, but flickering. as if the system was hesitating, as if it could feel the tremor moving through its own nervous system. I didn't look for Mina. I didn't need her gratitude. This wasn't about her, or me, or Jace. This was about pattern correction. The code had ignored its own blind spot, and I had simply filled it in. The lab was colder than usual that night. I wrapped my jacket tighter around my shoulders as the console glowed to life, data streaming like falling rain across the screen. Protocol 8. Active. 96 nodes linked. 3 feedback events logged. 0 detected breaches. That last number calmed me. The system still didn't recognize the rewrite as external. My lines were woven too deep, spliced through the old ethical threads my father had built when he still believed empathy could be learned. I didn't believe that anymore. But I did believe in consequences. They called Crestfall a networked community, but what they meant was that the pain of the few was acceptable as long as the many kept smiling. I disagreed, so I rewrote the rule, and in doing so, I carved a mirror into the heart of the machine. Now, when they pushed someone down, they would feel the ground too. Tomorrow, I'd see how far the cracks had spread, and maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understand that silence was never a sense. It was observation. It was watching. And this time, the system was watching them. It started like a virus, quiet, almost imperceptible, a static thread between pulses. By Monday morning, the system was no longer just echoing. It was looping. In the cafeteria, Aaliyah Crane dropped her croissant halfway through a joke and pressed her temples, eyes flickering like her bracelet. She didn't cry. Popular girls didn't cry in public, but her fingers trembled as she stood. Across the table, 2 other top-score girls blinked hard, confused, suddenly quiet. For a moment, they looked at each other like strangers. Their laughter had collapsed between them, not because the joke had failed, but because something beneath the surface had shifted. In first period, someone actually raised their hand to ask Mr. Kent if emotional migraines were a thing. He smiled gently, said stress was normal during exams, and kept talking about internal conflict in Shakespeare. But I saw his eyes flick toward the synths board, where student engagement readings had begun to deviate, tiny spikes and valleys where there had once been clean, predictable rhythm. It was happening. The pain was rippling without direct trigger. Feedback had evolved beyond the initial shove. Now, it was feeding on proximity, on resonance. Their own closeness, their cherished social bonds, had become the vulnerability. I passed Jace in the hallway between periods. His stride was too fast, his shoulders stiff, as if walking through water. He didn't meet my gaze, not that he ever had, but his eyes darted across every face like he expected someone to strike him with a thought. 3 steps behind him, his girlfriend Lacey was arguing with someone over a misread message. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut sharp enough to split silence. When she said, "Maybe if you weren't such a coward," Jace jerked. Not toward her. From her. His whole body tensed like a blow had landed, though no one had touched him. His hand went to his jaw, slow and confused. She didn't notice. She kept walking. That was when I knew the protocol had evolved. Pain no longer required direct action. The network was reacting to emotional proximity. Words, tone, even intention were now mirrored if emotionally linked peers were within field range. They'd forged those bonds for clout, for convenience. But now those threads meant every flare of cruelty ricocheted through their circle. And I watched them grow quieter, less certain. Laughter faltered mid-sentence. Smiles pulled too tightly. A softness crept into their expressions. Not sincerity, but suspicion. The very thing they built their status on, connection, had become the breach point. It was beautiful. Jace wasn't the only one unraveling. 2 other boys from his team, Grant and Tyson, requested back-to-back nurse visits after 3rd period. No visible injury, no fever, just unease, dizziness. One reportedly burst into tears during a group activity in design lab. He blamed the projector light, said it hit wrong. I doubt he realized the trigger had been his own sarcasm toward a quiet girl whose name he didn't even remember. Their words had always wounded. Now, they bled. The school didn't know what to do. They assumed it was psychological, group fatigue, tech saturation, performance anxiety. The nurse's office filled with students carrying nothing but invisible bruises and complaints they couldn't articulate. During lunch, I sat at the periphery. My table, as usual, was empty. But for the first time in 2 years, no one whispered when I passed. No one bumped my tray. My path through the dining hall felt untouched. The system had stopped reassigning my seat. I was no longer an acceptable target. I hadn't changed. The algorithm had. Or maybe it hadn't changed at all. Maybe it was finally doing what it was built to do. Protect those who hurt. Detect what wasn't said. Flag not the loudest, but the ones still bleeding after the world had moved on. My friendship score blinked. 18.9. Still low. But rising. I didn't care about the number. It wasn't a goal. It was just a reflection, like everything else. A readout of the fear in their bodies, the consequence dripping from their fingertips. In third period, a girl in the top 100 turned to her friend during class and whispered, "Why am I sad when I laugh?" She didn't mean to say it aloud. Her voice trembled like it had slipped past the net of her mind before she could trap it. Her friend didn't respond, just stared down at her glowing bracelet, which was pulsing dimmer than usual. Sinks was confused. Its calibration was built on intent, but intent had become corrupted. The same words that once elevated scores now trembled with backlash. Politeness felt sharp. Jokes curled into anxiety. The system logged it as an anomaly cluster. I knew because I still had access to the dev stream, buried beneath the empathy interface. Data stuttered. Emotional latency increased. Feedback rates fluctuated unpredictably. I watched it all from the robotics lab that evening. The console glowed faintly, the same blue-white light my father once called trustworthy. The logs spiraled across the screen. No red flags, no breach detected. The pain was perfectly legal. It wasn't even revenge anymore. It was balance. I leaned back in the chair, my spine aching from too many nights curled over broken code. My hands still carried faint lines where I'd pressed too hard, dug too deep. I traced one with a fingertip and thought about how much we ignore the slow damage, the kind that builds over time, unnoticed, until it collapses you. Now they were learning. They were learning what it meant to feel the weight of words, the sting of indifference, the tremble of someone shrinking away from you, not because they feared you, but because they expected to vanish beneath your smile. My father once said empathy was a bridge we forgot to cross, that most systems treat it like a suggestion, not a rule. But code, real code, doesn't lie. It reacts. And now, so did they. My rank climbed again that night. 4 and 67. Still low, still forgettable, but not invisible. I shut the console down and listened to the whir of the cooling fans fade into silence. Outside, the hallway was empty. Even the usual after-school chaos had dimmed. The noise had gone careful, like they were afraid of their own echoes. A smile touched my lips, not out of joy, but out of understanding, because this wasn't the end. It was only proof. And when people ask what I did to deserve peace, I'll simply say, they thought we were broken. Turns out, we were mirrors. Jace adapted faster than I expected. The protocol had held, for a time. The feedback loop was clean, efficient, impartial. Pain echoed only where pain had been inflicted. He learned that. They all did. And so they shifted. They stopped tormenting those at the center of their social rings, their equals, their mirrors. That was too risky now. The system made it feel real for them, not performative. Every shove came back. Every mocking message returned jagged and intimate. So they turned downward. Not physically. No one ever stooped in crestfall. That would be too obvious. But they and did the ranks, targeting those whose scores were so low the system barely acknowledged them. Students without emotional footprints. Ghosts on the sync register. Ones like I used to be. The protocol couldn't mirror what the system refused to see. It was brilliant, really. Strategic. It took me 2 days to spot it. 3 students from the bottom decile had visited the nurse within 24 hours. One left class mid-sentence, trembling, her bracelet reading, sentiment index not available. Another was found hiding in the music wing stairwell, sobbing into her sleeve. The SciNC system flagged nothing. No feedback was triggered. Because the empathy module disregarded low-scoring users as outliers, data too unstable, too unreadable, too statistically negligible. There were no emotional echoes for them because the system didn't consider their pain viable. That was the loophole. And Jace had found it. It wasn't the shove this time. It was the smile, the mock apology he gave afterward, the charming laugh that cloaked it all. He could step on someone's soul and the network wouldn't blink, so long as the person he crushed was beneath the score threshold. I stood outside the nurse's office and watched one of them come out, Danny Kim. Her face blotchy, trying to force a smile that didn't convince even herself. I recognized the pattern in her eyes. The way they moved too quickly, scanning for exits, for judgment, for someone to register her without pretending not to. I'd worn that same expression. Once. Flashback. My 3rd month at Crestfall. A group project in advanced systems theory. No one partnered with me. The teacher smiled, said I'd be a floater, said maybe my emotional flatline would balance the room, laughed softly. Some kids just don't transmit, she said. I remember my seat shifting back the next day. I remember her handwriting on my report card, emotionally unavailable, needs reintegration. I remember understanding for the first time that invisibility here was not absence, it was a verdict. Back in the present, rage did not burn in me. Rage is for people who are still waiting to be heard. Mine was sharper, quieter. A blade, not a bomb. I walked to the lab after curfew. The hallways hummed with recycled air and the scent of stale disinfectant. My footsteps echoed as if daring someone to stop me. No one did. The robotics lab flickered awake when I entered. Code scrolled like memory across the glass, a digital river fed by every cruel. Ty committed that day. I didn't hesitate. I wrote it clean. If initiating user has previously triggered echo feedback and victim has score 30, apply escalation multiplier of 2px to all linked nodes. No exceptions. This time I didn't test it, didn't debug, I didn't care if it overreacted, I didn't care if it cracked their perfect symmetry. Because the system might not value low scores, but I did. I knew what it meant to be unmeasured. And I was done letting ghosts be haunted in silence. The update went live just before gym period. I didn't attend, but I watched the feed from the old Science admin monitor, patched into the sensor net by a loop my father had buried in the old scaffolding, a back door no one had ever sealed. They were running drills. Jace was laughing, chest bare, his bracelet glowing too bright for someone that hollow. Then he did it. He threw a water bottle at Benji Park, a boy who never spoke above a whisper. It hit him in the back of the head. The group laughed. Even Benji forced a grin, shrinking beneath their gaze. But Jace froze. Mid-laugh, mid-victory. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then he screamed. It wasn't loud. Not at first. It was choked, like something cracked in his ribs and tried to claw its way out through his lungs. He fell to one knee, clutching his temples, bracelet strobing violently. 4 others dropped beside him like puppets with cut strings. Not out of sympathy, out of shared pain. The system glitched. The monitor flashed an error I'd never seen. Empathy spike exceeds predictive threshold. Perfect. I closed the feed. That night, Crestfall's internal emergency alerts triggered a level 2 anomaly. Emotional feedback cascaded across 22 nodes. The board held a late session, trying to pinpoint the breach. They wouldn't find it. I'd built the update into a redundant ethical submodule, one they couldn't disable without rewriting the empathy core, and they wouldn't dare. My father's signature still sat on that foundation layer, and even their ego wasn't enough to erase a ghost. They didn't even know I was in the room with them, not physically, but coded into the walls. The next morning, the school was quiet. Too quiet. Students walked slower, smiled less, avoided unnecessary contact. I passed Jace in the corridor. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. And for the first time, I think he saw what was really there. Not a glitch, not a bug, not broken, but deliberate. He found a loophole. I built him a cage. The school started holding its breath. Not officially, there were still announcements, still laughter carefully placed in the morning halls, still greetings exchanged with the shallow sweetness of students trying to pass as stable. But underneath it all, you could feel the tension rising like steam beneath the tiles. It wasn't the victims who were afraid anymore. It was the ones who used to smile after causing harm, the ones who held power because the system called them radiant. Now, even kindness had become suspect. Because the feedback loop had grown deeper, smarter. It no longer punished just overt cruelty. It responded to any spike, even empathetic ones. Since couldn't tell the difference between real grief and performative sympathy anymore. It only saw intensity. It only knew that strong emotions hurt. A comforting touch, a shared tear, a guilty confession, they all triggered echoes. It happened during peer support workshop. A senior named Eli leaned over to apologize to a anger student for a harsh comment he'd made a week ago. He meant it. He looked sincere. But within seconds of that moment of softness, his entire linked circle, 3 other seniors, wobbled visibly. One grabbed her desk, another gasped as if winded. Eli staggered to the water fountain and vomited into his hand. Empathy had become a weapon. Forgiveness had a cost now. Jace Whitlock figured it out faster than the rest. His once loyal circle started shrinking, not because they stopped liking him, but because being connected to him had become dangerous. Every time he flinched, they felt it. Every time someone glared at him across a hallway, 5 bracelets lit red. He looked tired now. Not broken, he was too proud for that, but hunted. His edges weren't as sharp. His gaze flicked everywhere at once, never settling. Even his walk had changed, less confident, more calculated, like he was measuring the emotional charge of each step. I passed him near the stairwell that day. He didn't look at me. But I heard his voice, low and jagged, when he leaned toward Tyson, one of the few still standing beside him. "Don't cry. Don't even flinch. She might be watching." I didn't smile, not outwardly, but the words landed like a gift. She might be watching. They thought of me as a shadow again, but not a ghost this time. Something real, something that hovered above them, silent and sharp. They still didn't know what I'd done, but they felt it. And more importantly, they feared it. That fear crept in quietly. It dripped into friendships like mold behind polished walls. It made them second-guess every laugh, every whisper, every look exchanged across a cafeteria table. Because pain wasn't just coming from cruelty now. It came from connection. It came from closeness. The very thing they'd weaponized, emotional bonding, was now a liability. Because Since couldn't compartmentalize anymore. It was overloaded, drenched in contradictory signals. The mirror I'd built no longer cared who cast the shadow. It just reflected what it received. They started to fracture. Aaliyah stopped sitting with Lacey. Caleb left Jace's group chat without warning. Messages dried up. Lunch tables looked like war zones after a ceasefire. Half-finished trays, downcast eyes, an eerie quiet beneath, with the hum of calculated indifference. And Mina? She smiled. Not much. Just once. But I saw it. A corner of her mouth tugged upward when Jace stumbled coming out of the gym, his eyes wide like he'd seen something behind him no one else could. Mina wasn't being cruel. She wasn't laughing. She was remembering. Remembering what it felt like when no one else flinched for you. And now, every time Jace suffered, even from nothing, 6 students staggered alongside him. I watched her across the quad from the old lab stairwell, my hands resting on the rusted rail. The wind caught her hair. She didn't notice me. She didn't need to. She already knew. I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. But I did feel accurate. The board held a private session that week. The AI had begun logging patterns it couldn't categorize. Too many false positives, too many overlapping spikes in the same zones. The words in the internal memo, one I accessed by rerouting an old data key into the personnel stream, were sterile but telling. Legacy code drift detected in empathy thresholds. Root cause undetermined. Iran Veil reference logs resurfacing in relational mirrors. Recommend patch delay until variance stabilizes. My father's name. Again, not mine, not yet. They hadn't connected the daughter to the drift, but they were starting to hear him again, starting to remember what he buried in the foundation. That empathy wasn't just feedback, it was contagion. And now, they were infected. Flashback. I was 7 when I asked him why some people only smiled with their mouths. He crouched beside me, rested a hand on my head, and whispered, "Because it's easy to pretend to care when the cost is 0. My job is to make the cost real." I hadn't understood it then. Now I did. I wasn't watching. I was listening. For once, they echoed back. But the system wasn't just humming anymore. It was warning. The overload was growing. And somewhere deep in the algorithm's heart, something was cracking. The balance had shifted, and I was the one who tipped the scale. Mina didn't speak much. Not to me, not to anyone, really. She'd learned, as I had, that silence often hurt less than trying to be heard and being met with calibration errors. But that morning, she stopped beside my desk. No entourage, no noise, just a pause in motion, like a glitch in the hallway stream. Her shadow fell across my books. I looked up, half expecting another brief flicker of polite obligation. But her expression held no duty. Only quiet. "Thank you," she said. Just that. The words weren't sweet. They weren't glowing. They sat between us like something raw and unwrapped, a wound not fully scabbed over, but no longer bleeding. I didn't respond, not with my voice. Because I didn't know how. Not then. She stood there a moment longer, as if waiting for something that didn't come, then nodded once and walked away, just far enough to keep the gesture from becoming anything more. But I felt it linger. All day, it lingered. I didn't see her again until the afternoon, in the library's dead zone, her fingers grazing spines like she was tracing familiar ghosts. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did, and simply chose not to disturb the equilibrium again. Either way, I waited until lights out to access the dev stream. Mina's ID, 34012AVK. Her sentiment path opened with a strange rhythm, soft, raw. Ices, not sharp spikes. Warmth, recognition, mutuality. Not manufactured proximity, but organic signal spread. Her empathy index had doubled since the previous week. Not because of trauma, because of resonance. That's when I saw it. The connection log. A new line in her sync profile, stamped not by my protocol, but by the root architecture. Linked node detected. Status, persistent. Type, emotional reciprocity. Origin, unregistered imprint. Note, connection sustained by mutual imprint. My stomach dropped. Not fear, not regret. Recognition. The link wasn't coded. Not by me. It wasn't part of mirroring Protocol 8. It had formed naturally. From pain, from proximity, from survival. It was real. And the other end of that link was me. I tried to break it. Fingers moved by instinct. I opened the override console and issued a sever command. I gave it every reason: unauthorized sync, emotional liability, legacy infection. The code blinked, rejected every attempt. Link cannot be severed. Mutual resonance exceeds threshold. There was no exploit to remove her. She was part of me now, and I was part of her. Flashback. I'm 9, curled beside my father in the old lab before it became a tomb of wires. He's teaching me to write my first functional loop. My fingers hover too long on the keys, unsure, and he smiles, not indulgently, but as if the moment matters. "You don't control the code," he said, gently correcting my syntax. "You collaborate with it. What you build, builds you." I hadn't understood him then. Not truly, but now I did. In trying to build justice, I had created something else. A bond. Not a prison, not a protocol, a thread. Mina wasn't bound to me by system logic. She was tethered to me by bloodless scars, wounds that had never broken the skin but still shaped the body. I stared at the console for too long. The lab lights buzzed softly above, a synthetic hum that once felt like safety but now sounded more like confession. I had worked so hard to remain outside the system's touch, to be its unseen hand, its shadowed correction, but here was the one thing I hadn't accounted for, someone reaching back. Mina had felt the loop, had recognized the symmetry, and instead of turning away, she had stepped closer. I wasn't ready for that, and I didn't know what to do with it. The next day, she didn't say anything. Neither did I. But her eyes met mine in the hallway, just for a breath, and there was no fear there, no obligation, no expectation, only understanding, a connection forged not through code, but consequence. I shut the console down early that night. I didn't scan the reports. I didn't fine-tune the algorithm. I just sat. For once, I let the silence be something other than calculation. Maybe I wasn't just writing punishment anymore. Maybe I was writing presence. Maybe that was worse. I had intended to make them hurt, to over what they gave, to carve symmetry into a system that had long forgotten how to feel. But somewhere along the way, I created something else. And it wasn't just hers to carry, it was mine too. I thought I was writing justice. But I wrote a tether. They stopped looking at each other. Not out of cruelty this time, but out of fear. Eye contact had become currency too costly to spend. A shared glance could trigger a tremor. A touch could send them reeling. And so they drifted apart like loose satellites, their once tight orbit shattered by empathy, turned inward. The sync system was destabilizing. What began as emotional equilibrium had evolved, again, into something uncontainable. The feedback no longer responded solely to malice. Now it punished exposure itself. To be seen was to be vulnerable. To feel too much, too fast, too raw, was to collapse. It happened to Aaliyah first. She sat in the middle of her morning class, jaw clenched, hands shaking as her bracelet pulsed faster than her heartbeat. She'd been watching someone cry across the room, not a friend, not a target, just someone. The resonance hit too hard. She reached under her sleeve, ripped off the bracelet, and accessed the firmware menu manually. And then, she deleted it. The core link, gone in 3 taps. Within seconds, she seized, collapsed onto the floor like her body had lost all understanding of its own weight. The nurse said it was a neural feedback crash. The system said it was a non-compliant node ejection, but everyone else in the room heard the truth echoing in the way their bracelets glowed after. She tried to escape the connection, and the system refused. I watched from the doorway. Not part of the class, just passing by. But her fall, her stillness, made the hallway silence itself. Every screen blinked in slow pulses, as if unsure whether to grieve or record. That night, the teachers whispered in low tone. In the staff lounge. I caught their words through an open network node someone forgot to shut. We might have to shut it down. It's infected. No, it's woken up. And they were right. Not about infection, about awareness. The system wasn't malfunctioning. It was doing exactly what it was meant to do. Reflect. Amplify. Force. Reckoning. They just never imagined what that would feel like. That week, I was summoned to the office. No warning, no disciplinary code. Just a slip placed on my desk by a TA who wouldn't meet my eyes. The hallway felt longer that morning, like time had stretched to give me a moment to prepare. But for what, I wasn't sure. Inside, the counselor sat behind a glass desk, expression neutral, but watchful. No one accused me of anything. No protocols mentioned. No logs pulled. They just looked at me. I waited. So did they. Eventually, the silence filled the room like fog. Thick, uncertain. Then the counselor cleared her throat and asked softly, "How are you feeling today?" I could have lied, could have played the part of the blank slate student, but I just blinked and replied, "Is that a question about wellness or a calibration test?" She didn't answer. I was dismissed 5 minutes later. No charges, no paperwork, just quiet footsteps and the sound of someone not quite ready to name what they feared. The next day, Jace was gone. No goodbye, no farewell ceremony, just an updated roster file. His name replaced, his bracelet profile archived, last recorded score, 39.7. Low enough to ghost the system, high enough to hurt when he left. They said he transferred for mental clarity, but everyone knew he didn't leave voluntarily. He'd become a signal too unstable to track, a walking liability, and I remained. That afternoon, I returned to the robotics lab, not to code, not to alter, just to exist. I sat beneath the console lights, listening to the slow hum of the servers, the soft metallic breath of a system still alive. Mina entered quietly, as she always did now. She didn't speak, just sat across from me, fingers folded in her lap, as if the room had always belonged to both of us. I glanced at her bracelet. Score, 72.1, rising steadily. She wasn't afraid of connection. She'd lived without it long enough to know its price. And now? Now she chose it, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. She didn't ask me questions, didn't reach for approval. She simply shared space, like survival didn't have to be solitary anymore. For a long time we said nothing. Then I opened the system dashboard and stared at the top corner, where a single number pulsed. Rank 401. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. Because it wasn't the rank that mattered. It was what it meant, that the system had changed, that I was in it now, not as a warning, not as an outlier, as a presence. They'd made me invisible, and I rewrote what that meant. I didn't want friends. I wanted justice. But maybe, in building one, I created the other. And maybe, just maybe, the difference between them was only the choice to stay. They sealed the lab 3 days before the semester ended, not with police tape or fanfare, just a quiet lock, a blank access panel, and a faculty-issued warning that the room was now under system maintenance, as if emotion could be debugged. I didn't resist. I didn't have to. The code was already in the bloodstream. Let them shut doors. Let them pad the walls with fear. They were too late. The system had changed, not broken, not corrupted, but altered, reflected. It now carried forward what they never intended it to feel. And I didn't undo it. I could have. There was still time before the lock, still back doors I'd buried in subroutines and whisper threads. I could have stripped the mirroring feedback, could have smoothed over the spikes, restored the illusion of sanitized connection. But I didn't. Because pain had never been the problem. The denial of it was. The Sync AI rebooted that weekend. Quiet patch notes scrolled across the student bulletin feed, vague terms like empathy regulation recalibration and voluntary desync protocol for overstimulated users. What they didn't say was what everyone already felt, that something fundamental had shifted. Students no longer clung to one another like armor. They moved slower, chose words more carefully. There was a new weight in every interaction, like stepping barefoot across ground you weren't sure had cooled yet. They weren't kinder, just aware. No one laughed as sharply, no one mocked as carelessly. Silence wasn't ignored anymore, it was noticed. And if someone looked away during a joke, the joke ended. I walked the halls without shrinking. No reassignments, no flickering bracelets warning others of my presence. My rank sat quietly at 397, holding steady. Not popular, not shunned, simply registered. Some days, I still felt eyes on me, but not with contempt, more like caution or curiosity, like they were trying to trace the lines of the system's scar and wondering whose name was etched beneath. Mina still sat beside me in the library. She didn't talk often, neither did I, but we shared space the way old scars do, tender, firm, undeniable. Her bracelet read 83.2 now. She never bragged, never adjusted her sleeve to show it. But I saw her hold someone's hand during a panic spell in the stairwell last week. No flinch, no echo, just a pulse between them. Steady, warm. She's still linked to me. I never broke the thread. But it doesn't hurt anymore. Some days I won. Dare what my father would say if he saw what I did with his legacy. Would he be angry? Afraid? Would he call it manipulation or evolution? Flashback. I'm 11, the day he showed me how to write a branching loop. His hand hovered over mine as I typed too cautiously, too slow. Trust the conditionals, he whispered. And remember, code listens, even when people don't. That's all I ever wanted, for the system to listen. And now it does. I haven't touched the code since the lab closed. Haven't tweaked or tested, haven't added new layers, because it's not mine anymore. What I built grew past me. It lives in them now, in the restraint behind a cruel thought not spoken, in the second glance before sarcasm, in the pause before choosing to connect. There's a peace in letting go. Not because the work is finished, but because it doesn't need me to breathe. This morning, I passed the data hall. The plaque with my father's name still glints in the light, weathered but intact. They tried to rewrite his intentions, to market compassion as compliance, but the foundation remained. I ran my fingers across the engraving. The steel was cool, familiar, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. A small group of first years passed me in the hall after that. One bumped into my shoulder. Years ago, that would have ended with laughter, a joke at my expense, a seat reassignment, a silent cut. But now? He blinked, paused, and said, "Sorry." I nodded. Nothing cracked, nothing echoed, just presence. That was enough. As I stepped outside into the courtyard, the wind pulled at the hem of my sleeve. The sun hadn't risen fully yet, and the light pooled at the edges like a secret not ready to be told. Leaves rustled softly, the same sound as the data stream used to make when it rippled cleanly. I stopped walking, stood still, and let myself feel. Not strategy, not vengeance, just stillness. For the first time, the weight of it wasn't unbearable. It was mine. The scars were mine. The silence, the change, the mirror. I smiled. Not for them, not for reward, just for me. Because I remembered what it was like to be alone in a system built to pretend I didn't exist. And now? Now they knew. They knew pain wasn't private, that every cut you carve, you carry. Even if you don't mean to, even if you pretend not to, because somewhere, someone is echoing back. And if you ever forget how it felt to bleed, someone else will remind you. Pain used to be private, but now it's shared. It lives under your skin, and if you ever forget how it felt, someone else will remind you. Pain doesn't vanish, it echoes, and sometimes that echo becomes power. Tell me, have you ever been punished for feeling too much or too little? Comment below, then like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to remember. Silence isn't weakness.